An Accounting of the Elder Scrolls by Quintus Nerevelis, former imperial librarian. After the supposed theft of an Elder Scroll from the Imperial Library, I endeavored to find any sort of index or catalogue of the scrolls in our possession, so that such situations may be avoided or at least properly verified in the future. To my dismay, I discovered that the moth priests are notoriously inexact when it comes to the actual physical manifestations of the scrolls, and had no idea how many they held or how they were organized. Merely asking the question evoked chuckles, as if a child was asking why dogs cannot talk. I will confess my jealousy of the ones who can read the scrolls grows, but I am not yet willing to sacrifice my sight to alleged knowledge. The older moth priests I attempt to engage in conversation seem as batty as any other elder who has lost their mind, so I fail to see what wisdom is imparted from the reading. In any case, I set out to create my own index of the Elder Scrolls in cooperation with the monks. Day by day we went through the tower halls, with them telling me the general nature of each Elder Scroll, so that I might record its location. Always careful never to glimpse the writings myself, I had only their word to go on. I meticulously drew out a map of the chambers where scrolls relating to various specific prophecies were located, where particular periods of history were housed. In all, it took nearly a year of plotting, but at last I had rough notes on the entirety of the library to begin my collation. It was here that things began to go amiss. In studying my notes, I found many areas of overlap and outright contradiction. In some cases, different monks would claim the same scroll to be at opposite ends of the tower. I know they have no taste for jesting, or else I would suspect I was being made the fool of in some great game of theirs. I spoke to one of the older monks to relate my concerns, and he hung his head in sorrow for my wasted time. "Did I not tell you," he coughed, "when you started this that all efforts would be futile? The scrolls do not exist in countable form. I had thought you meant there were too many to be counted. There are, but that is not the least of their complexities. Turn to the repository behind you and tell me how many scrolls are locked therein." I ran my fingers over the metal casings, tallying each rounded edge that they encountered. I turned back. 14, I said. "Hand me the 8th one," he said, reaching out his hand. I guided the cylinder into his palm. He gave a slight nod to acknowledge it. "Now count again," he said. Humoring him, I began to pass my hands over the scrolls, but could not believe what I was feeling. Now there were 18 scrolls, I gasped. The old monk chuckled, his cheeks pushing up his blindfold until it folded over itself, and in fact, he said, there always were. It was then that I enrolled as the oldest novice ever to accept into the cult of the ancestor moth of the Elder Scrolls. Effects of the Elder Scrolls. It is widely known among scholars that the Elder Scrolls entail a certain hazard in their very reading. The mechanism of the effects has at present been largely unknown. Theories of hidden knowledge and divine retribution were the subject of idle speculation with little investigation. I, Justinius Polonius, have undertaken to thoroughly document the ailments affected by the Elder Scrolls on their readers, though a unified theory of how they manifest continues to elude me, and remains a subject for future study. I have grouped the effects into 4, finding that the avenue of experience depends largely upon the mind of the reader. If this is unclear, I hope that a proper dichotomy will lay it plain. Group the first, For one who has received no training in the history or nature of the Elder Scrolls, the scroll itself is effectively inert. No prophecy can be scried, nor knowledge obtained. While the scroll will not impart learning to the uninformed, nor will it afflict them in any adverse fashion. Visually, the scroll will appear to be awash in an odd lettering and symbols. Those who know their astronomy often claim to recognize constellations in the patterns and connections, but such conjecture is impossible to further investigate since the very nature of this study necessitates unlearned subjects. Group the second, the unguarded intellects. It is the second group that realizes the greatest danger from attempting to read the scrolls. These are subjects who have an understanding of the nature of the Elder Scrolls and possesses sufficient knowledge to actually read what is inscribed there. They have not, however, developed adequate discipline to stave off the mind-shattering effect of having a glimpse of infinity. These unfortunate souls are struck immediately, irrevocably, and completely blind. Such is the price for overreaching one's faculties. It bears mentioning that with blindness also comes a fragment of that hidden knowledge, whether the future, the past, or the deep natures of being is dependent on the individual and their place in the greater spheres. But the knowledge does come. Group the third, mediated understanding. Alone in Tamriel, it would appear that the only cult of the ancestor moth has discovered the discipline to properly guard one's mind when reading the scrolls. Their novitiates must undergo the most rigorous mental cultivation, and they often spend a decade or more at the monastery before being allowed to read their first Elder Scroll. The monks say this is for the initiate's own protection, as they must have witnessed many unguarded intellects among the more eager ranks. With appropriate fortitude, these readers also receive blindness, though at a far lesser magnitude than the unguarded. Their vision fogs slightly, but they retain shape, color, and enough acuity to continue to read the mundane texts. The knowledge they gain from the scroll is also tempered somewhat. It requires stages of meditation and reflection to fully appreciate and express what one saw. Group the fourth, illuminated understanding. Between the previous group and this one exists a continuum that has, at present, only been traversed by the monks of the ancestor moth. With continued readings, the monks become gradually more and more blind, but they receive greater and more detailed knowledge. As they spend their waking hours pondering the revelations, they also receive a further degree of mental fortitude. There is, for every monk, a day of penultimate reading, when the only knowledge of the Elder Scrolls imparts is that the monk's next reading shall be his last. For each monk in the penultimate reading comes at a different and unknowable time. Preliminary work has been done to predict the occurrence by charting the severity of an individual monk's blindness, but all who reach these later stages report that the increasing blindness seems to taper with increased readings. Some pose the notion that some other unseen sense is, in fact, continuing to diminish at this upper range, but I shall leave such postulations to the philosophers. To prepare for his ultimate reading, a monk typically withdraws to seclusion in order to reflect upon a lifetime of revelations and appoint his mind for reception of his last. Upon his final reading, he is forever blinded as sure as those unguarded ones who have raced to knowledge. The illuminated one, though, has retained his understanding over a lifetime, and typically possesses a more integral notion of what has been revealed to him. It is hoped that this catalogue will prove useful to those who wish to further our mortal understanding of the Elder Scrolls. The moth priests remain aloof about these matters, taking the gradual debilitation that comes with reading as a point of pride. May this serve as a useful starting point for those hoping to take up such study. Dictated to Anstius Mechim, fourth of last seed, in the 126th year of the second era.